Title: My husband and son sent me to prison for his lover, and they want me to reflect on my mistakes. Chapter 1: The Day I Walked Free. The prison gates creaked open, the sound grating against my ears like the memories of the last 5 years. The sun was high, burning my skin as if to remind me I was alive, though a part of me wished I weren't. Clutching a small duffel bag with everything I owned, I stepped out. My heart felt heavy, but my mind was clear. I was free. 2 figures stood waiting. Lucas, my husband, or rather, the man I once called my husband, leaned casually against a sleek black car. His tailored suit clung to his broad shoulders, his polished shoes gleaming under the sunlight. Beside him stood Noah, my son, now 11 years old. He looked taller, leaner, his once babyish face now hardened by time. Yet, his eyes, they carried the same cold indifference I'd seen the day I was sentenced. Lucas straightened as I approached. "Leila," he greeted, his tone curt. "I trust your time inside has taught you how to behave." I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us. He hated that. Noah crossed his arms, mimicking his father's stance. "Aunt Clara says you need to stop being so stubborn. She's been taking care of Dad and me, and we don't want any trouble now that you're back." Aunt Clara. That woman. My replacement. I fought the bitterness rising in my chest and forced a smile. "Of course," I said softly. "No trouble." Noah smirked, as if he'd won some unspoken battle. "And don't even think about getting another dog," he added. "Aunt Clara and I hate animals. Remember what happened to Max?" Max. The dog I'd raised from a pup. The loyal companion who had been beaten to death by Clara under the guise of a discipline. The absurd excuse they'd used to justify sending me to prison, that I had attacked Clara in a fit of rage over a dog. I felt the bile rise in my throat but swallowed it down. "I remember," I replied, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Lucas opened the car door. "Get in," he ordered. I didn't move. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 crisp documents. Lucas's brow furrowed as I handed them over. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "The first is a divorce agreement," I said, my tone calm, almost casual. "The second severs my parental rights to Noah. I believe these will save us all a lot of trouble." Lucas's eyes widened, and for the first time in years, I saw something close to panic flash across his face. "Leila, this isn't funny." "I'm not joking," I said, my gaze unwavering. "I've done my time. I've reflected, as you so kindly suggested. And I've decided that my life is better off without either of you." Noah's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't just leave." I crouched to his eye level, a pang of sadness tugging at my heart. He was my son, after all. But the boy standing before me was no longer the child I had loved unconditionally. He was Lucas's son now, shaped and molded by years of Clara's influence. "I already left, Noah," I said gently. "You and your father made sure of that." I straightened and turned my back on them, walking away from the car, from the past, from the pain. The sun was still blazing, but for the first time in years, I felt its warmth instead of its burn. My freedom didn't come with happiness, but it came with clarity. And that was enough for now. Chapter 2: A New Beginning. The road stretched endlessly before me as I walked away from the prison, Lucas, and Noah. The duffel bag slung over my shoulder felt heavier with each step, not because of its weight, but because of the memories it carried. For 5 years, I had dreamed of this moment of freedom. But the reality wasn't as liberating as I had imagined. I had no home, no family, and no plan. My world had been systematically stripped away, piece by piece, until all that was left was a hollow version of the woman I once was. I flagged down a passing cab. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, gave me a once-over, likely noting the weariness in my posture and the pale complexion that came from years behind concrete walls. "Where to?" he asked, his voice gentle. I hesitated. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a vague notion of starting over somewhere far from Lucas, Noah, and Clara. The city center, I finally said. As the cab weaved through traffic, I stared out the window, watching the world blur past. Everything looked the same yet felt foreign. People hurried along the sidewalks, chatting on phones, sipping coffee, living lives that felt impossibly distant from my own. The cab pulled up in front of a modest motel in a quieter part of the city. "This good?" the driver asked. I nodded, handing him a few crumpled bills. "Thank you." The motel's receptionist barely glanced up as I checked in, handing me a key to a room on the second floor. The room was small and unremarkable, with faded wallpaper and a bed that creaked when I sat down. But it was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt a sliver of control over my life. I unpacked the few belongings I had, a couple of changes of clothes, a worn notebook, and a photo of Max. The sight of his familiar face brought tears to my eyes, but I blinked them away. This wasn't the time for mourning. Instead, I opened the notebook and began to write. Journal entry 1. 5 years. That's how long they took from me. I can never get that time back, but I can take back my life. Writing had always been my escape, even before the prison walls closed in around me. It was the one thing Lucas and Clara couldn't take from me, no matter how hard they tried. The next morning, I awoke with a plan. I couldn't erase the past, but I could shape my future. I needed 3 things: a job, a home, and a lawyer. The job came first. I spent the day walking through the city, scanning bulletin boards and help-wanted ads in store windows. By midday, I found a cafe that needed a dishwasher. The manager, a wiry man named Ethan, hired me on the spot, asking no questions about my past. "Start tomorrow at 6 a.m., he said, handing me an apron. The home was trickier. The motel was a temporary solution, but I needed something permanent. By the end of the week, I found a small, run-down studio apartment. The landlord didn't ask for references, just the first month's rent up front. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The lawyer was the hardest. I needed someone willing to fight for me, to ensure Lucas and Clara couldn't manipulate the system again. But lawyers cost money, and money was something I didn't have. One evening, as I scrubbed plates in the cafe's kitchen, Ethan approached me. "You're good at this," he said. "Reliable. Ever thought about picking up extra shifts?" I hesitated. The long hours were already exhausting, but the extra money could bring me closer to my goal. "I'll do it," I said. The weeks blurred together as I worked double shifts, saved every penny, and slowly began to rebuild my life. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the pain of betrayal lingered. At night, I replayed the moment Lucas had stood in court, testifying against me, and the cold, detached expression on Noah's face. One day, while cleaning tables during a quiet afternoon, a customer's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Leila?" I froze, the sound of my name foreign after years of being called nothing but a number. Turning, I came face to face with a familiar figure. "Emily?" I whispered, barely recognizing my childhood friend. Her eyes widened, taking in my worn apron and tired face. "It is you." I thought you moved away." Moved away. That was one way to describe what had happened. I forced a smile. "Something like that." Emily didn't press, sensing my reluctance to explain. Instead, she offered me a warm smile. "Let's catch up sometime. You still have my number?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I'd ever call her. Emily represented a part of my life I could never get back, a time before Lucas, before prison, before everything fell apart. As she left, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild more than my life. Maybe I could rebuild myself. And this time, I'd make sure no one could tear me down again. Chapter 3: Seeds of Revenge. The days at the cafe turned into weeks, and slowly, I began piecing my life back together. The exhaustion of long hours washing dishes and scrubbing floors weighed on my body, but the routine steadied me. I felt invisible, but for the first time in years, that wasn't a bad thing. Being invisible gave me space to think, to plan. Lucas and Clara hadn't just destroyed my life, they'd stolen my dignity. And though I had walked away from them that day outside the prison, I couldn't forget or forgive. Not yet. I found myself replaying their words in my mind during quiet moments. Lucas's cold demand, "Have you learned your lesson?" Noah's echo, "Aunt Clara and I hate dogs." They expected me to come crawling back to their rules, their world. But they were wrong. One evening at the cafe. It was a slow Tuesday night when Ethan, my boss, handed me a clipboard with the week's paychecks. "Count your hours, make sure they're right," he said, yawning. As I signed off, a name on the cafe's roster caught my attention. Clara Davis. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the name, the handwriting familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. Could it be the same Clara? I forced myself to breathe. Clara was a common name. It didn't mean anything. But the thought festered, planting a seed of unease in my chest. After my shift ended, I searched Clara Davis online, my phone trembling in my hands. Within seconds, her photo appeared, bright smile, perfectly styled hair, and the same smug expression I'd seen so many times in court. My hands clenched into fists. She worked at a PR agency only a few blocks away. The plan begins. That night, I sat in my dingy apartment with a notebook spread open on the coffee table. The clean pages called to me, and for the first time in years, I felt the urge to write, not as a form of escape, but as a way to regain control. At the top of the page, I scrawled one word, revenge. It wasn't just about retaliation. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself they had stolen. I began jotting down everything I knew about Lucas, Clara, and Noah. Their routines. Their weaknesses. Their allies. Lucas was meticulous, almost obsessive about his reputation. He thrived on being seen as a devoted family man, even as he carried on his affair with Clara. Any scandal could shatter the illusion he'd built. Clara was a manipulator, using her charm to turn people against me. But charm could only go so far. People like her always had secrets, and secrets had a way of coming to light. Noah was the wild card. My son had chosen them over me, but he was still young, impressionable. A part of me wanted to reach out to him, to show him the truth. But another part wondered if it was too late. A chance encounter. 2 weeks later, I saw her. I was running errands, carrying a bag of groceries back to my apartment, when Clara walked out of a coffee shop with a man I didn't recognize. She didn't notice me, but I noticed her. She looked different from the polished version of herself in court, tired, frazzled. She glanced over her shoulder as she spoke to the man, her voice low and urgent. I ducked into a nearby alley and pulled out my phone, snapping a photo. My heart raced as I reviewed the image. Who was this man? What were they discussing? Clara's weakness had always been her ambition. She was desperate to climb the social ladder, no matter who she stepped on to get there. If this man was someone important, or worse, someone dangerous, I could use it. First strike. Back in my apartment, I pored over the information I had gathered. I created a fake email address and sent the photo of Clara with the man to her workplace, attaching a vague, anonymous note. "Do you know what your star employee has been up to outside the office?" I didn't expect much to come of it, but it was a start. A small, calculated move to unsettle her. The next morning, as I arrived at the cafe for my shift, I noticed her name was trending on local forums. People were speculating about the photo, questioning her loyalty to the agency and to Lucas. The first crack had appeared. Reflection. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at Max's photo. His soft brown eyes seemed to look back at me, as if he understood everything I was feeling. "I'm doing this for us," I whispered. But a part of me wondered if revenge would really bring closure. Could I move forward without confronting the pain they had caused? Without forcing Lucas, Clara, and Noah to face the truth of what they had done? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was, I wouldn't let them control my narrative anymore. This was my story now, and I intended to write it my way. Chapter 4, The Cracks Deepen. The fallout from the photo I'd sent to Clara's workplace was louder than I anticipated. By the end of the week, the online chatter had spiraled into accusations and questions about her ethics. She was known for her pristine reputation, and now the very image she'd worked so hard to cultivate was crumbling. At the cafe, I overheard conversations among customers. Clara's PR agency was a frequent topic. "Did you see the post about that PR executive? What's her name?" Clara Davis, a woman at table 4, whispered to her friend. "Yeah." Apparently her boss is furious. "The guy in the photo with her is some client she wasn't supposed to meet off the record," the friend replied. I kept my face neutral as I wiped tables nearby, my hand steady even as my heart raced. This was exactly what I wanted, a small but precise blow to her image. Lucas's call. The next evening, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved, but I'd never forget it. Lucas. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello?" "Sophia," his voice was cold, sharp. "Do you have any idea what's happening to Clara? She's being slandered online, and I know you had something to do with it." I laughed softly. "Why would I care about your mistress, Lucas? Don't play games with me," he snapped. "I know you're bitter, but this is low, even for you." My grip on the phone tightened, but I forced my tone to stay calm. "Bitter? You mean like the bitterness of spending 5 years in prison for something I didn't do?" He didn't reply immediately, but I could hear his shallow breathing on the other end. Finally, he said, "Stay out of this, Sophia. Whatever you think you're doing, it won't end well for you." His threat only strengthened my resolve. Investigating the past. That night, I decided to dig deeper into the events that led to my imprisonment. The charges against me had been trumped up, orchestrated by Lucas and Clara with frightening precision. But 5 years was a long time, and secrets often had a way of surfacing. I started by researching the key witnesses from my trial, focusing on one name in particular, Clara's colleague, Susan Bennett. She had testified against me, claiming I'd been violent and unstable. At the time, I couldn't refute her lies. Clara and Lucas had made sure I was isolated, with no one to support my side. Susan's social media was surprisingly open. Scrolling through her posts, I noticed a pattern: lavish trips, expensive gifts, all coinciding with the time of my trial. Clara had clearly paid her off. I took screenshots of everything, documenting each inconsistency. If I could prove that Susan's testimony had been bought, it would cast doubt on the entire case against me. Unexpected ally. A week later, as I was finishing my shift at the cafe, Ethan approached me. "Hey, Sophia. Someone's been asking about you." I froze. "Who?" "A woman. She said her name was Susan Bennett." My stomach dropped. Why would Susan be looking for me now? Had Clara sent her to silence me? "I didn't tell her much," Ethan continued, "but she left this." He handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a phone number and a note: "We need to talk. It's important." I hesitated, unsure if I should contact her. But curiosity won out. That night, I called the number, half expecting Clara or Lucas to pick up. Instead, Susan's voice came through, shaky and uncertain. "Sophia? Is that you? Why are you looking for me?" I asked bluntly. "I made a mistake," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Back then, at the trial, I lied. Clara paid me to testify against you, and I've regretted it ever since. I want to make it right." Her confession hit me like a freight train. For years, I dreamed of hearing those words, but now that they were real, I didn't know how to respond. "Why now?" I asked. "Clara's been losing her grip," Susan admitted. "She's desperate, and I think she's going to try to pin something on me to save herself. If you help me, I'll testify on your behalf, tell everyone the truth." I didn't trust her, not yet. But this was an opportunity one couldn't ignore. Confrontation. The next morning, I arranged to meet Susan at a small diner outside the city. She arrived looking nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting Clara to appear at any moment. "I have proof," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were emails, bank statements, and photos, everything I needed to expose Clara's corruption. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I asked, my voice hard. Susan's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was scared. Clara threatened me, said she'd ruin my career if I didn't cooperate. But I can't live with this guilt anymore." I studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Finally, I said, "If you're serious about this, you'll have to testify again, this time in my favor." She nodded, determination replacing her fear. "I will. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Make sure Clara pays for what she's done." Reigniting the fight. With Susan's evidence in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice. For Max, for myself, and for the years I'd lost. I contacted a lawyer, explaining my case and presenting the new evidence. He was skeptical at first, but as he reviewed the documents, his expression shifted. "You might actually have a chance to reopen your case," he said. "But it won't be easy. Lucas and Clara will fight tooth and nail to protect themselves." "Let them," I said. "I'm not afraid of them anymore." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. Chapter 5, The Calm Before the Storm. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the pile of evidence Susan had given me. Emails detailing Clara's manipulations, bank statements showing payments to witnesses, and even text messages from Lucas coaching Susan on what to say during the trial. It was more than I could have hoped for, and yet, the weight of it all pressed down on me. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a battle against two people who had once been my family. Max's unexpected visit. The next afternoon, I heard a knock at my door. Opening it, I found Max standing there, his small face wearing a frown that looked far too old for a boy his age. "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Dad sent me," he said, clutching his school bag tightly. "He said I should spend time with you, to see if you've gotten better." I raised an eyebrow. "Better? At what?" Max hesitated, then muttered, "At being normal." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Normal? Did he teach you that word, Max?" He looked away, his cheeks flushing. "Aunt Clara said it." "Of course, she did." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Max shuffled in, glancing around my small, sparsely furnished apartment. "Why do you live here? Dad said you used to have a big house." "Because your dad took that house away from me," I said simply, watching his reaction. His eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he sat on the couch and pulled out his tablet, clearly uncomfortable. Reaching out. As Max busied himself with a game, I decided to make a phone call. Susan had mentioned a journalist she trusted, someone who had been digging into Clara's dealings for years. If I wanted to bring this case to light, I needed the media on my side. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. "This is Jessica Hayes." "Jessica, my name is Sophia Carter," I began. "I was falsely imprisoned 5 years ago, and I have information that might interest you." There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Sophia Carter? I've read about your case. Are you saying you have new evidence?" "More than that," I said. "I have proof that Clara Davis and Lucas Carter orchestrated everything." Jessica's tone shifted, becoming eager. "Can you meet me? I want to hear everything." We arranged to meet the next day, and as I hung up, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was the first step in dismantling the facade Clara and Lucas had built. An uneasy dinner. As evening approached, Max looked up from his game. "I'm hungry." I sighed, realizing I hadn't prepared anything. "What do you want to eat?" "Pizza," he said instantly. I ordered a pizza, and as we sat at the small dining table, I watched Max carefully. He seemed so innocent, yet he'd been raised by two people who thrived on lies and manipulation. "Max," I said, breaking the silence. "Do you remember the day I went to prison?" He blinked, looking confused. I was little, but I remember Dad and Aunt Clara saying you did something bad. And do you believe them? I asked gently. He fidgeted, avoiding my gaze. I don't know. Aunt Clara said you hurt her. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm. What if I told you that wasn't true? That they lied to you? Max looked up, his eyes wide. Why would they lie? Sometimes people lie to protect themselves, I said. And sometimes, they lie to hurt others. He didn't respond, but I could see the gears turning in his young mind. The warning? Later that night, after Max had fallen asleep on the couch, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. Hello? How dare you drag Susan into this? Clara's icy voice hissed through the line. Clara, I said, leaning back in my chair. I was wondering when you'd call. You're making a mistake, she snapped. Do you think anyone will believe you? You're a convicted criminal. Not for long, I said. Susan's willing to testify, and I have enough evidence to expose you for what you are. Her laugh was sharp and cruel. You really think this will end well for you? Lucas and I will destroy you, Sophia. You already tried, I said. But this time, I'm fighting back. Before she could respond, I hung up. A glimpse of the past. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, memories of my life before prison flooded back. Lucas's charming smile when we first met, the way he'd held my hand during Max's birth, the promises he'd made to love and protect me. And then the betrayal. I trusted him with everything, only to find out he'd been conspiring with Clara behind my back. The pain of those memories was still raw, but now it fueled my determination. I glanced at the divorce papers I'd prepared but hadn't yet filed. They were more than just a legal document, they were a symbol of my freedom, a declaration that I was done being a victim. Tomorrow, I would meet Jessica Hayes. And after that, I would take the next step in my fight for justice. Chapter 6, Breaking the Chains. The morning sunlight seeped through the cracks in my curtains, casting a warm glow across my modest apartment. It was a new day, and one filled with the promise of progress. After waking Max and getting him ready to be picked up by Lucas, I prepared myself for my meeting with Jessica Hayes. Max's reluctance. As I packed a small lunch for Max, I noticed his unusually quiet demeanor. Max, are you okay? I asked, handing him a juice box. He hesitated, then looked up at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. Are you really going to fight Aunt Clara and Dad? I knelt to his level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Max, sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to people who hurt others, even if it's hard. But, what if they get mad? He whispered. They will, I said honestly. But I'm not afraid of them anymore. Before he could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. I opened it to find Lucas standing there, his usual mask of indifference firmly in place. I'm here for Max, he said curtly. I turned back to Max, your dad's here. Max grabbed his bag and walked toward Lucas, but before he stepped out, he turned to me and said quietly, I like dogs, Mom. I didn't want Bella to die. My heart clenched as I watched him walk away. The meeting with Jessica. I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a corner seat where I could observe everyone coming and going. Jessica Hayes arrived right on time, a confident woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sophia, she greeted, extending a hand. Jessica, I replied, shaking it firmly. We settled into our seats, and I handed her a folder containing the evidence Susan had provided. Jessica flipped through it, her expression growing more intense with every page. This is damning, she said finally. If what you're saying is true, Clara and Lucas have committed multiple crimes, perjury, falsifying evidence, and possibly even embezzlement. It's all true, I said. I just need someone to help me bring it to light. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with determination. I'll do more than that. I'll make sure this story reaches every corner of the media. But Sophia, this won't be easy. Clara and Lucas will fight back with everything they have. I'm ready, I said firmly. A shocking discovery. After the meeting, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jessica had agreed to start digging deeper into Clara's dealings, promising to expose her corruption piece by piece. As I walked back to my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. If you know what's good for you, drop this now. The message was followed by a picture of Max walking with Lucas, a clear warning. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. They were threatening my son. I quickly called Jessica. They're trying to intimidate me, I said, my voice shaking. Stay calm, she replied. This is a classic tactic. Don't respond to the message, but forward it to me. I'll have someone trace it. I did as she instructed, but the fear lingered. Max was the one part of my old life I couldn't let them use against me. Max's hidden truths. When Max returned later that evening, he seemed more subdued than usual. As he played quietly in the living room, I noticed bruises on his arm. Max, what happened? I asked, kneeling beside him. He pulled his arm away, trying to hide it. It's nothing. I fell. I gently held his arm, inspecting the marks. Max, you can tell me the truth. Did someone hurt you? He hesitated, then whispered, Aunt Clara got mad because I spilled juice on her dress. Rage boiled within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Max, no one has the right to hurt you. Do you understand? He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't want to go back there, Mom. You won't, I promised, pulling him into a tight hug. I'll make sure of it. Planning the next move. That night, I sat at my desk, going over every piece of evidence again. My goal was no longer just to clear my name, it was to ensure Max was safe and far away from Clara and Lucas. I called my lawyer, an older man named Robert who had been a family friend before the trial. He had stayed loyal to me even when everyone else turned their back. Robert, I need to file for full custody of Max, I said. He sighed. Sophia, you know that's going to be an uphill battle. Lucas has the money, the influence, and the reputation. I have proof that Clara is abusive, I said. And evidence that Lucas was complicit in my imprisonment. Isn't that enough? It's a start, he admitted. But we'll need more. Do you think Max would be willing to testify? I hesitated, the thought of putting Max through something so stressful weighing heavily on me. I'll talk to him, I said finally. A mother's resolve. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Max's soft breathing from the next room, I felt a surge of determination. Lucas and Clara had taken everything from me, my home, my freedom, my dignity. But they wouldn't take Max. This fight wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protecting my son and giving him the life he deserved. And no matter what it took, I would win. Chapter 7, The Tides Turn. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also a quiet, growing sense of purpose. I had no choice but to keep pushing forward, for Max, for myself, and for the justice I had been robbed of for so long. A startling revelation. It was early one morning when Jessica called with news that made my heart race. I've got something, she said, her voice tense with excitement. We've been tracing Clara's financial records, and we found something interesting. I leaned forward, unable to contain my anticipation. What is it? Clara has been funneling money through a shell corporation for years, Jessica explained. Payments that match up with suspicious accounts linked to high-level officials and even some people involved in your trial. This is bigger than we thought, Sophia. I felt a shiver run through me. If Clara had been involved in a larger network of corruption, it wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a criminal enterprise. Can you get me more? I asked urgently. I need it for court, and I need to get it fast. I'm on it, Jessica said, before hanging up. Max's safety. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the growing worry for Max. Clara's temper had only gotten worse, and Lucas, while outwardly supportive, had become more distant. Every conversation with him left me with a growing sense of unease. I knew he was still under Clara's influence, still trying to protect his own reputation, even if it meant sacrificing our son's safety. One afternoon, when Max was at school, I went to visit Robert again. He was reviewing the custody case, but when I walked in, he looked more serious than usual. "Sophia, we need to move fast," he said, setting down a thick folder filled with legal documents. "I've been looking over everything, and there's a glaring issue. Lucas and Clara are both involved in this, and their influence might intimidate a judge. If we're going to win full custody, we need to act now." I nodded, steeling myself for what was coming. "What's the plan?" "First, I'll file the emergency motion for custody," he said, tapping his pen on the desk. "But we need Max's testimony." "I know it's a lot to ask, but he's the key." I took a deep breath. "I'll talk to him tonight. But I'm not going to put him in harm's way. If he's scared, I'll back down." "You're his mother," Robert said gently. "You know what's best for him. But the longer you wait, the harder it will be." Max's hesitation. That night, after dinner, I sat Max down on the couch. He was fiddling with a toy truck, clearly avoiding eye contact. It was hard to tell whether he was just being a child or whether there was something deeper going on inside him. "Max, we need to talk," I began gently. He looked up, his eyes wary. "About what, Mom?" "I need you to be very honest with me, okay? This is really important." He nodded, but I could see the tension in his small body. "Do you feel safe with Aunt Clara and Dad?" I asked, choosing my words carefully. Max shifted uncomfortably, his fingers curling tightly around the truck. "I don't like it when Aunt Clara yells, and sometimes Dad gets really quiet." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. "If you don't feel safe, you need to tell me. You know I will protect you, no matter what." "I'm scared," he whispered. "I don't want to go back." Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him into my arms. "You won't go back, Max. I promise." I knew then that I had to go through with it. Max had to testify. It wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore, it was about saving him from the people who claimed to care for him. The courtroom battle begins. The next morning, I met with Robert, who had already filed the motion for custody. The next hearing was scheduled for the following week. My anxiety was palpable as we entered the courthouse, my hands shaking as I clutched Max's hand tightly. "I'm scared," he whispered, looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly. "But you're so strong. You're doing the right thing." As we waited outside the courtroom, Clara and Lucas arrived, their faces masks of feigned calm. Clara's gaze flickered toward me, then to Max, and her smile was nothing short of venomous. "Don't get too comfortable, Sophia," she sneered. "You won't win." Lucas said nothing, his eyes empty as he scanned the room. But I saw it, the slight hesitation in his gaze when he looked at me. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I had his attention. The doors to the courtroom opened, and we were called inside. As we entered, I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me. But this was it, the first step in my battle to regain control of my life and my son's future. Max's testimony. Max was called to the stand, his small body barely able to see over the edge of the podium. I watched anxiously as Robert guided him through the questions, making sure to keep the process as gentle as possible. "Max," Robert began, his voice calm. "Do you remember the time you were staying with Aunt Clara and your father?" Max nodded, his eyes cast downward. "Can you tell the court what happened when you were there?" Robert asked gently. Max hesitated, then looked at me before speaking in a small voice. "Aunt Clara hit me when I spilled the juice. She yelled at me and said I was bad." A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom, and I could see Clara's face tighten with fury. Lucas's hand clenched at his side. "Do you feel safe with Aunt Clara and Dad?" Robert asked, his voice steady. Max looked up at me, his eyes filled with fear and trust. "No. I want to stay with Mom." It was all I needed. The fight is far from over. As we left the courtroom that day, I felt a small victory. Max's testimony had shattered Clara's facade, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But I also knew the battle was far from over. Clara and Lucas would fight back. They would stop at nothing to keep their control over Max and maintain their lies. But now, I wasn't afraid. I had the truth on my side, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 8, The Gathering Storm. The days after Max's testimony passed in a blur of anticipation and fear. It was clear that Clara and Lucas were far from giving up, but now I had the upper hand. The words Max had spoken in the courtroom, the quiet truth, had rattled them more than I could have imagined. Yet, as the days wore on, the tension only seemed to rise, thickening the air between us all. A new strategy. That evening, after the court session, I met with Robert in his office to discuss the next steps. He had been reviewing the evidence, and his face was taut with concern. "Sophia, this is bigger than we expected," he said, pushing a folder across the desk toward me. "The corruption that Clara's involved in goes deep. It's not just a custody battle anymore, we're talking about organized networks, money laundering, and possibly even trafficking. If we expose her fully, it could shake the foundation of everything she's built." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. I never imagined it would go this far. "I know," Robert said, his voice softer now. "But the more we dig, the more we uncover. The truth is starting to unravel, and it's only a matter of time before Clara's entire world comes crashing down." "But what about Max?" I asked, my mind racing with concern. "Is he safe? What if she tries to retaliate?" "We're putting measures in place," Robert assured me. "I've already contacted the authorities, and there will be security watching over him. We'll also need to get a restraining order against Clara, but I'm afraid it won't be enough." I nodded grimly. The thought of Clara doing anything to Max made my stomach churn. But I had to keep moving forward. There was no other choice. Lucas's shift. Later that night, after Max had gone to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, my thoughts racing. I had been avoiding Lucas's calls for days, not knowing how to deal with him. But now, I was beginning to realize that I couldn't avoid him forever. He was still my husband, even though I had filed for divorce. We shared a history, one that now seemed so distant and irreparable. But did that mean I still had any place in his world? Or was I just a pawn in his game? I picked up the phone and dialed his number. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Sophia," his voice was hoarse, almost apologetic. "I know things have been difficult, but we need to talk." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my voice even. "What do you want, Lucas? After everything, what is there left to say?" I'm trying to protect you," he said, his words slow and hesitant. "I don't want to see you go through this. Please, let's just talk." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him everything he had done, to expose the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal. But instead, I said, "If you care about me at all, you'll help us. You'll help Max." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then he spoke softly, as though a weight had lifted from his chest. "I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt you." I closed my eyes, feeling a fleeting moment of hope. Maybe there was still a chance for him to do the right thing. Clara's wrath. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast for Max, the doorbell rang. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. No one ever visited this early, and the sharpness of the sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I opened the door cautiously, and there she stood, Clara. Her smile was tight, like a mask she couldn't fully keep in place. "Sophia," she said, her voice low and controlled. "I think it's time we had a little chat." I stared at her, my stomach churning. I had expected a confrontation sooner or later, but seeing her in person was another thing entirely. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked, my voice calm but unwavering. "I'm here to remind you of your place," Clara said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked down at Max, who was standing behind me, his face a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Max," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You've been such a good boy, haven't you? You wouldn't want your mother to lose everything because of a few bad decisions, would you? Max took a step back, clutching my arm tighter. I could feel his fear, and it made my blood boil. Clara was trying to intimidate him, manipulate him, just as she had tried with me all those years ago. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son from you, I said firmly, my voice steady. Clara's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. Don't think you're going to win this, Sophia. You've already lost. All of this, your custody, your reputation, it's all slipping away. I met her gaze without flinching. I'll never let you hurt him again. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. The air was thick with tension. Clara's eyes flickered with something dark, something dangerous. But before she could say anything else, I heard a knock at the door. A man in a suit stood there, one of Robert's associates, his face expressionless. Miss Sophia, we need to speak with you, he said. Clara's eyes narrowed. What is this? Who are you? The man stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. This is a legal matter. I suggest you leave. Clara's gaze flickered between me and the man before she turned on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking against the floor in a sharp, angry rhythm. A step closer to victory. The man handed me a stack of papers as he entered the house. These are the new motions we've filed. The evidence is airtight, Sophia. We're going to win this. My heart surged with hope. We were closer than ever. But I knew Clara wouldn't back down easily. The fight was far from over. Max looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes. Mom, what's happening? I knelt down to his level, my heart swelling with love. We're going to be okay, Max. I promise. A threat looms. As the days wore on, the case seemed to move in our favor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was planning something. She was always one step ahead, always playing a dangerous game. I could feel her looming presence, like a storm waiting to strike. But I would be ready. This time, I wasn't going to let her win. Chapter 9, The Final Push. The weeks after Clara's visit were filled with a relentless sense of urgency. I could feel the pressure mounting, but I also knew that the wheels of justice were turning in our favor. Robert had pulled together an unassailable case. Every piece of evidence, every lie Clara had told, was being meticulously documented. But still, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of dread that she was planning something more dangerous than a mere courtroom battle. The calm before the storm. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing the case documents when Max walked in, his small hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper. His face was flushed with worry. Mom, there's a letter for you, he said, handing it to me. I looked at the envelope, a feeling of foreboding creeping over me. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, but there was something oddly familiar about the feeling it gave me. I opened it slowly, scanning the words inside. Sophia, you have no idea what you're dealing with. You may have thought you won this battle, but the war is just beginning. Don't get too comfortable. Your son is in my sights, and I'll make sure you regret crossing me. See? My blood ran cold. Clara. I knew then that she wasn't just going to sit back and let things unfold. She was plotting something darker, something I couldn't anticipate. The plan unfolds. I immediately contacted Robert, my hands shaking as I relayed the contents of the letter to him. He assured me that we would handle it and that additional security would be arranged for both Max and me. But even his reassurance couldn't fully calm the rising storm inside me. That evening, Max was unusually quiet, sitting on the couch with his arms crossed. He was normally so full of energy, but something was weighing on him. I sat next to him, trying to gauge his mood. What's wrong, sweetheart? He shrugged, his eyes downcast. I don't like her, Mom. Aunt Clara, she's always mean to you. I smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair out of his eyes. I know, honey. But she can't hurt us anymore. We're going to be okay. He looked at me, his eyes wide with concern. But she said she would take me away. The words hit me like a physical blow. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. She can't take you away, Max. You're safe with me. I won't let anything happen to you. He nodded, but I could see the fear still clouding his eyes. He had witnessed enough of Clara's manipulations to understand that she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Clara's last play. The next day, I was jolted awake by a loud knock at the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly got out of bed, my mind racing. I opened the door cautiously, my eyes narrowing as I saw who stood before me. It was a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the brim of a cap. He was holding a small package, his hands shaking slightly. "I've been instructed to deliver this to you," the man said, his voice barely audible. I took the package from him, my heart pounding as I closed the door behind him. The air in the house felt thick with tension. What could it be? I opened it carefully, revealing a small box. Inside was a flash drive. I looked at the piece of technology, my instincts screaming at me to be cautious. But I couldn't afford to ignore it. I rushed to my laptop, plugging the flash drive in. The screen flickered, and then a video popped up. I hit play, and my heart dropped as I watched Clara's smug face appear on the screen. "Sophia," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think you've won? You think you can take my son from me? Let me show you just how far I'm willing to go." The video cut to a dark, grainy clip of Max playing outside our house, oblivious to the camera. Then, Clara's voice returned. "You really think you're protecting him, don't you? I've made sure that every move you make is being watched. If you think this is over, you're sorely mistaken." The video ended with a single, chilling message: "He's mine, Sophia. And I will stop at nothing to take him from you." I felt a chill run down my spine. Clara had crossed the line. She wasn't just trying to take Max from me legally, she was trying to break me emotionally. The confrontation. The next morning, I was on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was getting closer, that she was making her move. My nerves were frayed, and I found it hard to focus on anything. Max had noticed my unease, and I tried to reassure him, but even I wasn't convinced. At that moment, Robert called. His voice was calm but urgent. "Sophia, we've uncovered something critical. Clara's been involved in a series of illegal transactions. It's not just about custody anymore. She's in deeper than we realized. I need you to be very careful." "I will," I said, my voice trembling. "But Clara is coming after Max. She won't stop until she has him, Robert. I can't let that happen." "I know. We're putting in extra measures, but it might not be enough. We need to confront her head-on." I hung up the phone, the weight of his words settling heavily on my shoulders. The stakes were higher than ever before. The last stand. That evening, as the sun began to set, I felt the familiar feeling of dread creeping in again. Max was sitting at the table, drawing quietly, while I tried to focus on the legal documents spread before me. But the knock at the door was unmistakable. This time, when I opened it, I was ready. Clara stood there, her eyes cold and calculating. She was dressed in a sharp black coat, her lips painted a bright red that seemed almost out of place against her pale complexion. She held a briefcase in one hand and her other hand rested casually at her side. "I think it's time we finish this, don't you?" Clara said, stepping into the house without an invitation. I didn't flinch. "What are you doing here, Clara?" "I came to make a deal," she said, her voice smooth. "I think we both know who's in control now." I narrowed my eyes, my pulse quickening. "What deal? You're not going to win this. You know that, right? You're just delaying the inevitable." She opened the briefcase, revealing documents and a thick stack of cash. "I'll leave Max with you if you agree to walk away from this case. No questions asked." I glanced at Max, who was now standing at the door to the living room, his eyes wide with confusion. "Leave," I said firmly. "I won't make any deals with you." Clara smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll regret this, Sophia. You have no idea how far I can go." With that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me with a sense of finality that I couldn't ignore. The last test. The following days were filled with mounting tension. Clara's threats were becoming more frequent, and I could feel the walls closing in. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when I was so close to getting everything I had worked for. Max looked at me, his eyes full of trust and love. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't give up. No matter what Clara did, I would protect my son, and this time, I was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 10, The Battle for Max. As Clara's threats became more frequent and her manipulations more desperate, I found myself sinking into a quiet storm. I was determined to protect Max, but every time I thought I was one step ahead, Clara had already anticipated my move. It was as if she had eyes everywhere, watching my every move. But I wouldn't back down. I couldn't. A new threat. The morning after Clara's visit, I woke up to the sound of a phone call that made my stomach drop. It was Robert again, his voice tense. "Sophia, we've just received word from a source inside Clara's circle. She's planning something big, something that could ruin everything we've worked for." I could hear the concern in his voice, and it sent a chill down my spine. "What is it?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "We think she's going to make a public spectacle out of the custody battle, something that will get the media involved. If that happens, it will be hard to maintain control. She's desperate and will stop at nothing to humiliate you. A public scandal." My heart pounded in my chest. Clara had always been skilled at manipulation, but this was crossing a line I wasn't prepared for. If she went public with the custody case, it would not only damage my reputation, but it would also jeopardize Max's future. "I need you to stay vigilant," Robert continued. "We'll make preparations on our end, but keep Max close and avoid any unnecessary contact with Clara. She's dangerous now more than ever." The calm before the storm. Despite Robert's warnings, I tried to keep things as normal as possible for Max. I didn't want him to see the growing tension in my eyes, the fear that I couldn't hide. I tried to create a safe space for him, one that felt untouched by Clara's madness. We spent our days doing things we loved, playing board games, baking together, and reading his favorite stories. But I could feel the storm looming. It was only a matter of time before Clara made her next move. That night, as I tucked Max into bed, I whispered, "No matter what happens, I will always protect you. We're in this together, okay?" Max looked up at me with his big, trusting eyes. "I know, Mom. I'm not afraid. You're the strongest person I know." His words made my heart swell, but they also reminded me of the weight I carried. I had to stay strong, not just for me, but for him too. The breaking point. The next day, I was greeted by the flashing lights of news cameras outside my house. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. Clara had made her move. I stepped out the door, trying to keep my composure, but the swarm of reporters was relentless. They shouted questions, their voices overlapping, demanding answers. "Sophia, do you have anything to say about the custody battle? Clara, the woman you once called family, says you're unfit to care for your son. Is she right?" I tried to push through the crowd, but their voices rang in my ears, drowning out everything else. My mind raced. This was exactly what Clara had wanted. She knew that by dragging me into the media spotlight, she could turn the public against me. Just as I was about to lose my nerve, I heard a familiar voice, Robert's. "Get back inside, Sophia. We'll handle this." He moved toward me through the crowd, his face hard with determination. With his help, I managed to retreat inside, away from the media frenzy. A confrontation in the courtroom. The following week, the day of the court hearing finally arrived. I was more prepared than ever, but Clara's games were far from over. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Clara was already seated at the front, her lawyer by her side, her expression a mixture of smug confidence and coldness. She barely acknowledged me as I entered. "Are you ready to lose, Sophia?" she muttered under her breath, her words sharp. I ignored her, taking my seat. Robert gave me a reassuring nod, but even he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. This wasn't going to be easy. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Clara's lawyer stood up first, making his case with practiced ease. He painted a picture of me as an unfit mother, someone who had been reckless and irresponsible. Clara's lies about me were getting more absurd with each passing moment. But I wasn't going to let her tear me apart. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands shaking slightly but my resolve unwavering. Your Honor, I am a mother who loves her son more than anything in this world. I have worked tirelessly to provide him with a safe, loving home. Clara may try to paint me as something I'm not, but the truth is, she has been nothing but a destructive force in both my life and Max's. I could feel Clara's eyes boring into me, but I didn't look at her. I focused on the judge, on the process, on the truth. Clara has attempted to manipulate and control every aspect of my life, and now she's trying to take the one thing that truly matters to me, my son. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel the weight of my words sinking in. Clara's face twisted with rage, but I stood tall, knowing that I was fighting for my son, for our future. The final showdown. As the day wore on, both sides presented their arguments. Clara's accusations grew more ridiculous, but I stood my ground. I was no longer the woman who would quietly take everything thrown at her. I had fought too hard to lose now. Finally, it was time for the judge to deliberate. I sat in the silence, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything had led to this moment. When the judge returned, he looked at us both with a stern expression. After careful consideration, I have come to a decision. I held my breath, waiting for the words that would change everything. You are both good parents, but the truth is clear, the evidence shows that Clara has used manipulative tactics to alienate and control the family. I'm awarding full custody to Sophia, and any attempt by Clara to undermine this will be met with legal consequences. The words hit me like a wave. I couldn't believe it. I had won. Max was finally safe. The aftermath. The next few days were a blur. Clara's threats became even more erratic as she tried to lash out, but I remained steadfast. The court's decision was final, and I wouldn't let her jeopardize everything I had worked for. Max and I settled back into our routine, and though there were still whispers and rumors, I no longer felt the suffocating weight of Clara's presence looming over me. We were free. And we would stay that way. Chapter 11, The Price of Freedom. The weeks that followed the court ruling were a mix of relief and lingering tension. Max and I were adjusting to our newfound sense of peace, but the scars of the past months still lingered. Clara had promised to fight back, and I knew better than to assume the battle was over. She was a woman driven by desperation, and I couldn't predict how far she would go to get what she wanted. Rebuilding trust. Max was slowly starting to return to the cheerful boy I remembered before all the chaos. I made sure to spend every possible moment with him, trying to compensate for all the time we lost during the turmoil. We went on small adventures, nature walks, trips to the zoo, and nights filled with his laughter as we baked cookies together. But the shadows of the past were never too far away. I could see the small tremors of uncertainty in Max's eyes whenever he heard sirens or saw the news on the television. He was too young to understand the full extent of the threats we'd faced, but I knew that it was my job to protect him from the harsh realities for as long as I could. One evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, Max asked in a quiet voice, "Mom, are we safe now?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. But I had to reassure him, for his sake. I took a deep breath, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Yes, Max. We're safe now. And I'll always make sure we stay that way. A reluctant visitor. The day after that conversation, a visitor arrived at my door, Robert, my lawyer and ally throughout this ordeal. He had a grave expression on his face, and I knew instantly that something wasn't right. "Clara's been working behind the scenes," Robert began, his voice tight with urgency. "She's hired a private investigator. She's digging into your past, trying to find anything she can use against you. I don't need to tell you that this isn't over. I nodded slowly, feeling a cold unease settle in my stomach. I had expected this. Clara wasn't the type to back down easily, and she wasn't going to let go of Max without a fight. But this felt different. She wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to destroy me. She's making this personal, I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. What can we do? We need to prepare for whatever she throws at us, Robert replied. I've already started looking into her finances and any dirt we can use, but we need to stay one step ahead. I suggest you lay low, avoid drawing attention to yourself, and don't give her anything she can use. It was the same advice I'd heard 100 times before, but now it had a different weight to it. Clara was no longer just an ex-relative, she was a threat. I had to be smarter than her. And I would be. A dangerous game. The days turned into weeks, and Clara's attempts to destabilize my life became more frequent and underhanded. She sent letters, making veiled threats about exposing personal details from my past. She anonymously contacted people from my old life, hoping to dig up anything, to paint me as unfit for Max. Her efforts were petty, cruel, and meant to destabilize me, to make me question everything I thought I knew about my own history. But I didn't buckle. I didn't falter. I kept my focus on what mattered most, Max and our safety. One evening, while I was out grocery shopping, I received a call from Robert. His voice was urgent. Sophia, it's worse than we thought. Clara's gone to the media with some fabricated story about you. She's claiming that you had an affair with her husband before the divorce, and that's why she's seeking custody of Max. She's framing you as the villain. I could feel the blood drain from my face. This was exactly what I had feared. Clara had played the long game, and now she was trying to destroy me in the public eye. She knew how to twist the truth, how to create doubt, and now she was using the media as her weapon. What are we going to do? I asked, my mind racing. This could ruin everything. We'll fight it, Robert replied. You have nothing to hide. We'll expose the lies, and we'll make sure the court knows the truth. But we need to move fast. This could escalate quickly. The calm before the storm, again. The media storm Clara had unleashed was impossible to ignore. Articles filled with gossip, lies, and twisted facts began to flood the internet. I had to lock down my social media accounts, change my phone number, and make sure Max wasn't exposed to any of it. But no matter how much I tried to shield him, the constant anxiety and stress were taking their toll. One night, while I sat in the living room, trying to prepare for the upcoming legal battle, Max came to me, his small hands clutching a drawing he had done at school. He handed it to me, his face bright with innocence. Mom, I made this for you, he said, his voice full of pride. I looked down at the drawing, a picture of us, smiling and holding hands, surrounded by hearts and stars. It was simple, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized that, in spite of everything, Max still believed in our love and in the safety of our home. I hugged him tightly, my voice trembling. Thank you, sweetheart. You make me so proud. Max smiled up at me, as if he knew everything would be okay. For a moment, I believed it too. But deep inside, I knew Clara wasn't done yet. She would stop at nothing to win, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw my way. A moment of reckoning. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Clara's threats grew louder, and the media's scrutiny intensified. But just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the phone rang. It was Robert. Sophia, there's been a shift. Clara's making one last move. She's trying to settle this outside of court, offering a deal. She wants to meet with you. I didn't trust her, but I had no choice. This was the moment I had been waiting for. If Clara wanted to negotiate, then I would play her game, but on my terms. Tell her I'll meet with her, I said, my voice resolute. And make sure you're there with me. I was done running. It was time to face Clara once and for all. Chapter 12, The Final Confrontation. The day of the meeting with Clara arrived, and every fiber of my being screamed to back out. But I knew I couldn't. Not for myself. Not for Max. This was the moment to take control of the situation and end the battle on my terms. I spent the morning preparing, pacing around the house as I considered the best way to handle the situation. Clara wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Her cunning and manipulative nature were part of the reason I had ended up in prison in the first place. But this time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. The meeting location. The meeting was scheduled in a neutral location, an upscale cafe downtown, far from our usual lives. The atmosphere was serene, with soft music playing in the background, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. But despite the calm setting, the tension in the room was palpable. I arrived early, sitting at a table near the window, trying to control my nerves. Robert was by my side, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this. He had been my rock through all of this, a constant source of strength when I felt the ground beneath me crumbling. Clara walked in a few minutes later, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She was dressed in an expensive suit, her hair perfectly styled, and her makeup flawless. But there was something about the way she held herself, so composed, so calculated, that made my stomach churn. She had always been a master of appearances. Sophia, Clara said coldly, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she slid into the chair opposite me. It's good to finally see you face to face. I've been waiting for this moment. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I allowed her words to hang in the air, assessing the situation. Robert, standing behind me, gave me a reassuring nod, letting me know that he had everything under control. Well, I said, leaning forward slightly. Let's not waste time. What do you want, Clara? Clara's eyes narrowed as she regarded me, a slight smirk playing on her lips. I think we both know what I want, she said, her tone hardening. Max. I want him back. You've had your time with him, but it's my turn now. I fought the urge to let my anger get the best of me. She had been so focused on getting her revenge, so determined to ruin everything, that she had forgotten the most important thing, the love I had for my son. No, I replied firmly, meeting her gaze with a coldness I hadn't realized I had in me. You can't have him, Clara. Max is my son, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. You've hurt enough people already. Clara's face twisted with frustration. You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? She spat. You think you're the better mother, the better person, just because you've played the victim. You've manipulated everyone around you, and now you expect them to support you. Well, I won't let you take everything from me. Her words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I had heard her venom before. It didn't scare me anymore. If anything, it made me more resolute. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. I've been the victim. But not because of some story you've made up. I've been the victim of your cruelty, your lies, and your manipulation. And I'm done letting you control my life, Clara. The deal. Clara's eyes flickered with something, anger, perhaps, before she quickly masked it with a smile. I know this isn't easy for you, she said, her voice softening, trying to appeal to some emotional part of me. But I'm willing to make a deal. If you just step aside, I promise you won't have to deal with this anymore. I'll give you a generous settlement, and you'll never have to worry about me again. I almost laughed. It was the same manipulative tactic she had used all along, trying to buy me off, trying to make me think that money and security were enough to make everything disappear. But I had learned over the past few years that those things weren't worth sacrificing my peace, my dignity, or my relationship with Max. I don't need your money, Clara, I said firmly. I need my son. And I'll never give him up. Not to you, not to anyone. Clara's smile faltered, and for a moment, I could see the cracks in her facade. But she quickly recovered, leaning back in her chair, eyes cold and calculating. You'll regret this, Sophia, she warned, her voice low. You've made a dangerous enemy today. I've always known that, I replied without hesitation. But it's you who's underestimated me. I won't back down. Not now, not ever. The unexpected twist. The conversation was tense for the next several minutes, with Clara trying, and failing, to convince me to give up my rights to Max. But as I prepared to leave, she made one final attempt to shake me. "I don't expect you to understand, but I did what I had to do. You can't protect Max forever, you know," Clara said, her voice dripping with venom. "The truth always comes out." Her words were a veiled threat, and they sent a chill down my spine. But I stood my ground. "We'll see about that," I said, standing up from the table. "The truth is already out. And I'm not afraid of you anymore." Clara's eyes burned with hatred, but she didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. The damage was already done. I had refused her demands, and now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. After the meeting. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, there was still a battle ahead, but today, I had made it clear to Clara that I wouldn't back down. She could threaten me, she could manipulate me, but she couldn't break me. Not anymore. Robert met me outside, his expression unreadable. "That was intense," he said quietly. "Intense, yes," I replied, my voice steady. "But necessary. She's not done, but neither am I." We walked in silence for a few moments before he spoke again, his tone softer this time. "I'm proud of you, Sophia. You've come a long way." "I've had to," I said, glancing at him. "For Max. For myself. And for everyone else who's ever been hurt by Clara's lies." As we drove back to the house, I realized something important. I was finally taking control of my life. No matter what Clara did next, I would face it head-on. Max was my son, and no one, not even Clara, could take him from me. Chapter 12, The Final Confrontation. The day of the meeting with Clara arrived, and every fiber of my being screamed to back out. But I knew I couldn't. Not for myself. Not for Max. This was the moment to take control of the situation and end the battle on my terms. I spent the morning preparing, pacing around the house as I considered the best way to handle the situation. Clara wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Her cunning and manipulative nature were part of the reason I had ended up in prison in the first place. But this time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. The meeting location. The meeting was scheduled in a neutral location, an upscale cafe downtown, far from our usual lives. The atmosphere was serene, with soft music playing in the background, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. But despite the calm setting, the tension in the room was palpable. I arrived early, sitting at a table near the window, trying to control my nerves. Robert was by my side, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in this. He had been my rock through all of this, a constant source of strength when I felt the ground beneath me crumbling. Clara walked in a few minutes later, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She was dressed in an expensive suit, her hair perfectly styled, and her makeup flawless. But there was something about the way she held herself, so composed, so calculated, that made my stomach churn. She had always been a master of appearances. "Sophia," Clara said coldly, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she slid into the chair opposite me. "It's good to finally see you face to face. I've been waiting for this moment." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I allowed her words to hang in the air, assessing the situation. Robert, standing behind me, gave me a reassuring nod, letting me know that he had everything under control. "Well," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Let's not waste time." "What do you want, Clara?" Clara's eyes narrowed as she regarded me, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "I think we both know what I want," she said, her tone hardening. "Max. I want him back. You've had your time with him, but it's my turn now." I fought the urge to let my anger get the best of me. She had been so focused on getting her revenge, so determined to ruin everything, that she had forgotten the most important thing, the love I had for my son. "No," I replied firmly, meeting her gaze with a coldness I hadn't realized I had in me. "You can't have him, Clara. Max is my son, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. You've hurt enough people already." Clara's face twisted with frustration. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you?" she spat. You think you're the better mother, the better person, just because you've played the victim. You've manipulated everyone around you, and now you expect them to support you. Well, I won't let you take everything from me. Her words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I had heard her venom before. It didn't scare me anymore. If anything, it made me more resolute. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. I've been the victim. But not because of some story you've made up. I've been the victim of your cruelty, your lies, and your manipulation. And I'm done letting you control my life, Clara. The deal. Clara's eyes flickered with something, anger, perhaps, before she quickly masked it with a smile. I know this isn't easy for you, she said, her voice softening, trying to appeal to some emotional part of me. But I'm willing to make a deal. If you just step aside, I promise you won't have to deal with this anymore. I'll give you a generous settlement, and you'll never have to worry about me again. I almost laughed. It was the same manipulative tactic she had used all along, trying to buy me off, trying to make me think that money and security were enough to make everything disappear. But I had learned over the past few years that those things weren't worth sacrificing my peace, my dignity, or my relationship with Max. I don't need your money, Clara, I said firmly. I need my son. And I'll never give him up. Not to you, not to anyone. Clara's smile faltered, and for a moment, I could see the cracks in her facade. But she quickly recovered, leaning back in her chair, eyes cold and calculating. You'll regret this, Sophia, she warned, her voice low. You've made a dangerous enemy today. I've always known that, I replied without hesitation. But it's you who's underestimated me. I won't back down. Not now, not ever. The unexpected twist. The conversation was tense for the next several minutes, with Clara trying, and failing, to convince me to give up my rights to Max. But as I prepared to leave, she made one final attempt to shake me. I don't expect you to understand, but I did what I had to do. You can't protect Max forever, you know, Clara said, her voice dripping with venom. The truth always comes out. Her words were a veiled threat, and they sent a chill down my spine. But I stood my ground. We'll see about that, I said, standing up from the table. The truth is already out. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. Clara's eyes burned with hatred, but she didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. The damage was already done. I had refused her demands, and now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. After the meeting. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, there was still a battle ahead, but today, I had made it clear to Clara that I wouldn't back down. She could threaten me, she could manipulate me, but she couldn't break me. Not anymore. Robert met me outside, his expression unreadable. That was intense, he said quietly. Intense, yes, I replied, my voice steady. But necessary. She's not done, but neither am I. We walked in silence for a few moments before he spoke again, his tone softer this time. I'm proud of you, Sophia. You've come a long way. I've had to, I said, glancing at him. For Max. For myself. And for everyone else who's ever been hurt by Clara's lies. As we drove back to the house, I realized something important. I was finally taking control of my life. No matter what Clara did next, I would face it head-on. Max was my son, and no one, not even Clara, could take him from me. Chapter 13, Revelations and Repercussions. The days following the confrontation with Clara felt like a blur. The initial relief I'd felt after standing my ground quickly faded, replaced by the harsh reality of the situation. Clara wasn't the type to back down after a defeat. I knew she'd been plotting something, and I needed to stay vigilant. The first sign of trouble. It started with a phone call late one night. I had just finished putting Max to bed and was sipping tea in the living room, trying to unwind from the chaos. The phone's sudden ring jolted me from my thoughts. Hello? I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. Hello, Sophia, a familiar voice said. It was Clara, but this time her tone was colder, more calculated. You think you've won, don't you? But I'm not done with you yet. I sat up straighter, my grip tightening on the phone. What do you want, Clara? I just wanted to remind you that I'm still in control. You may have won the battle, but not the war, she said, her words laced with venom. You'll soon see what I mean. People like you never stay in control for long. Before I could respond, the line went dead. My heart was pounding in my chest. Clara wasn't the type to make idle threats. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. But I wouldn't let fear take over. I had to stay focused, for Max and for myself. The incident at Max's school. The very next day, I received a call from Max's school. The principal's voice was strained as he explained what had happened. Max had been involved in a confrontation with another child in his class. At first, I thought it was just an isolated incident, but when I learned the details, my stomach sank. Max had gotten into a physical altercation with a boy named Tom, the son of one of Clara's closest allies. The fight had been triggered by cruel taunts from Tom, who had been calling Max names and accusing him of being just like his mother. The situation escalated when Max, in a moment of pure frustration, shoved Tom to the ground. The principal assured me that Max hadn't started the fight and that he had been disciplined according to school policy. But the damage was done. The word about the fight spread like wildfire, and soon, Clara's influence was evident. It wasn't just the school that knew about the incident, and soon, it seemed like everyone in the community was talking about it. Max was hurt by the rumors and the taunts, but I could see that the incident had also sparked something in him. He wasn't the same innocent boy I had once known. He had been forced to grow up too quickly in the wake of everything that had happened. The burden of my past mistakes, of Clara's manipulation, was starting to weigh on him too. That afternoon, as Max sat silently in his room, I sat beside him, trying to reassure him that things would get better. I wanted to protect him from the harsh realities of the world, but I knew I couldn't shield him forever. All I could do was stand by him, just as Robert had stood by me. The twist, Clara's last move. As if the school incident wasn't enough, that evening, I received another unexpected visitor, Robert. He came by to check on Max, but his expression was more serious than usual. There was something he needed to tell me. I've been keeping an eye on Clara, he began, sitting down beside me. She's been making moves behind the scenes. I've discovered something that could change everything. I turned toward him, my heart racing. What is it? Clara's been meeting with your ex-husband, he said, his voice grim. She's planning to take full custody of Max, and she's using all the connections she has to make it happen. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? How? That's impossible. I don't think it's impossible, Sophia, Robert said. She's been working with legal teams, making sure the case is stacked in her favor. And there's something else. Your ex-husband has agreed to testify on her behalf. I leaned back, trying to process what Robert had said. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. Everything I had worked for, the safety, the security, the stability I had built for Max, was at risk. Clara was playing a long game, and I had underestimated her. She's not just trying to take him away from me, I whispered, the realization hitting me hard. She's going after my entire life. She wants to destroy everything I've built. That's what it looks like, Robert said, his voice full of concern. We need to act fast. I'm not sure how much time we have, but you can't afford to wait any longer. The decision. I knew Robert was right. If I didn't act now, I could lose Max for good. But I also knew that Clara wasn't someone I could fight with just legal strategies. I needed to be smarter. I needed to outmaneuver her. The decision was clear. I would fight with everything I had, not just in the courtroom, but in every way possible. Clara had underestimated me once before, but this time, I would be ready. I'm going to fight, I said, standing up with renewed determination. I'm going to make sure Clara can't take him away from me. Robert stood up with me, his hand on my shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. We'll fight together. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. We still had a long road ahead of us, and Clara wouldn't make it easy. But I wasn't afraid anymore. This was my fight, and I would do whatever it took to protect Max and the life we had built. The calm before the storm. As the days passed, I prepared for the inevitable battle. I hired a private investigator to dig into Clara's connections and her plans. I spent countless hours with my lawyer, making sure we had all the evidence we needed to prove that Clara was unfit to care for Max. And all the while, Clara's threats continued. She would send cryptic messages, telling me that I had no idea what I was up against. But I no longer cared about her empty words. I had something more important to focus on, Max's future. By the time the court date arrived, I was ready. The storm was coming, but I would face it head-on. Clara had no idea what she was about to face. Chapter 14, A Fight for the Future. The court hearing was set. I could feel the weight of the impending battle hanging over me, but there was no turning back now. With Robert's support and the evidence I had gathered, I felt ready. But Clara wasn't going to make it easy. The courtroom battle. On the morning of the trial, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Clara was already seated with her lawyer, her icy gaze locking onto mine as I entered. She wore the same smug expression she always had, convinced she was going to win. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. The proceedings started, and Clara wasted no time presenting her case. She painted a picture of me as an unfit mother, someone who had been reckless and irresponsible in her past. The courtroom seemed to hang on her every word as she made her accusations, but I didn't flinch. I knew her game, and I had prepared for it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall, my voice steady as I told the court the truth. I spoke about my love for Max, the sacrifices I'd made for him, and how far I'd come since the time of my imprisonment. I showed them the evidence, highlighting Clara's manipulation and deceit. Every word I spoke felt like a victory, chipping away at Clara's carefully constructed lies. The unexpected twist. Just as I thought we were making progress, Clara's lawyer dropped a bombshell. He presented new evidence, photos of a previous altercation between Max and another child, one that had happened before I was imprisoned. They argued that it proved I wasn't capable of controlling Max, that I hadn't been a responsible mother. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I countered with the fact that Max had been under immense pressure during that time, and that his actions were out of character for the boy I knew. I pointed out the recent progress Max had made and how his actions were influenced by the trauma he'd endured, particularly the bullying from Clara's associates. The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered the arguments. The verdict. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally made his decision. The room was tense as he spoke. I find that both parties have presented strong cases. However, based on the evidence, I am granting primary custody of Max to his mother, Sophia. The defendant's claims of unfit motherhood have not been substantiated. I could hardly believe it. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but all I could hear was the judge's words ringing in my ears. It wasn't over yet, but this was a huge victory. Aftermath. As Clara stormed out of the courtroom, her face twisted in fury, I felt a surge of relief. But this wasn't the end. Clara wouldn't give up that easily. Still, for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a real chance at winning the battle for Max's future. And with Robert by my side, I knew we could face whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but I was ready. I would protect Max, no matter what it took. Chapter 15, The Calm Before the Final Storm. In the weeks following the courtroom victory, I allowed myself a brief moment of peace. For the first time in years, I was able to breathe a little easier. The weight of Clara's shadow had lifted, if only for a short while. But I knew better than to get comfortable. Clara wouldn't let this defeat slide so easily. Max, though, seemed lighter now. The tension that had clouded him for so long began to dissipate. He was sleeping better, laughing more, and slowly starting to heal from the emotional scars Clara had inflicted on him. I couldn't be more thankful for this small reprieve. But my mind never fully rested. I knew the storm was still coming. Clara's first move after the verdict. As expected, it didn't take long for Clara to make her next move. A week after the court ruling, I received a letter, hand-delivered by one of her associates. The letter was thick, formal, and smelled faintly of perfume, Clara's scent. I had no doubt she had meticulously crafted every word. The letter was a demand. Clara was appealing the court's decision. She argued that the ruling was flawed, citing emotional manipulation on my part. The letter hinted at new evidence that, if presented correctly, could turn the case in her favor. I knew this was coming, and still, the impact of it hit me hard. It felt like I had just crossed a finish line only to realize that the race wasn't over. I stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring as my emotions swirled inside me. It wasn't just the legal battle that weighed on me, it was the realization that Clara was going to stop at nothing to destroy everything I had worked for. I sat down at the kitchen table and dialed Robert. He answered after a few rings. "Robert, it's happening again," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Clara's appealing the decision. She's not letting this go." "I knew it was coming," Robert replied, his voice calm but with an edge of concern. "We need to prepare for this. Let's meet tomorrow and go over the details. We'll get ahead of her this time." I nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over me. This battle wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Max's future, and I couldn't afford to lose. Max's struggle, the emotional toll. The next few days were a blur of preparations for the appeal. I met with my lawyer, gathering everything we could to counter Clara's move. But amid all the stress and strategy, I noticed a change in Max. He had been quieter than usual, withdrawn even. He no longer ran to greet me with his usual enthusiasm after school, and his eyes often seemed distant, as though he were carrying a weight that was too heavy for his young shoulders. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the window, staring out into the yard, his legs tucked up beneath him. I approached quietly, not wanting to startle him, but he heard me and looked up with a faint, sad smile. "Max, what's going on?" I asked softly, sitting next to him. "I don't like what's happening, Mom," he said, his voice small. "All the fighting. All the people saying things about you." My heart broke at the vulnerability in his voice. This was a battle that I hadn't just been fighting for my own life, it was one that had been thrust upon Max, and I hadn't realized the full extent of it until now. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know it's hard, sweetheart. But you have to know that I'm doing this for you. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." "I know, Mom," he whispered, and for a moment, he rested his head on my shoulder. "I'm just scared." I held him tighter, trying to offer him the comfort and reassurance that I myself wasn't sure I could give. This wasn't just a fight for custody anymore, it was a fight for Max's peace of mind and emotional well-being. And I would never stop. Preparing for the appeal, a new strategy. The days leading up to the appeal were a whirlwind. Robert and I met multiple times, going over the new evidence Clara was attempting to present. We worked tirelessly to find ways to discredit her claims and prove that her accusations were just another part of her manipulation. But we couldn't afford to be complacent. We needed something more than just counter-arguments. It wasn't until Robert made an unexpected suggestion that the strategy began to take shape. "We need to go on the offensive," he said one night, after a long day of reviewing documents. "We need to show the court exactly who Clara is. Not just as a mother, but as a person. We need to make it clear that her motives are driven by something much darker than just wanting to protect a Max." I hesitated, unsure of how far I could go. "Are you suggesting we bring up her past?" "Yes," Robert said. "Clara's been hiding things that would make anyone question her fitness to be a mother. We'll find out everything we can. If we expose her for who she truly is, the court will have no choice but to see through her manipulation." The plan was risky, but it was the only move we had left. I agreed, and we began digging into Clara's past, talking to old acquaintances, and gathering whatever information we could find. Clara's desperation. As the trial date drew near, Clara grew more desperate. Her lawyer had become more aggressive in his tactics, attempting to tarnish my reputation in ways that were not only false but incredibly cruel. He painted me as an unfit mother who had made reckless decisions, using my past as a weapon against me. But I wasn't going to let her win. I had faced far worse in my life than Clara's petty threats and lies. As I prepared for the final showdown in court, I realized that this was more than just about custody. This was about taking back control of my life, standing tall in the face of everything Clara had thrown at me. Chapter 16, The Final Showdown. The day of the appeal hearing arrived, and everything felt different. The weight of the past few weeks had settled into the pit of my stomach, but I knew that there was no turning back. This was the moment where I would finally take control, not just of my future, but of Max's. The courtroom felt colder today. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel Clara's presence across the room. She sat with her lawyer, her eyes cold and calculating, as if she were already planning her next move. I could sense the determination radiating off her, but I had something she didn't: truth. And truth had a way of winning in the end. Clara's desperation, dirty tactics. The moment the proceedings began, Clara's lawyer launched into his attack. He had clearly spent hours rehearsing his argument, hitting every point he thought would discredit me. But today, something was different. His words didn't have the same weight as before. They were just lies, and everyone in that room could sense it. He painted me as an irresponsible, neglectful mother, trying to ruin Max's life with my emotional instability. His voice echoed in the large courtroom, but as he spoke, I could see the judge's expression hardening. The words didn't land the way he hoped. Clara's face twisted in frustration, as if she knew that her lawyer wasn't having the desired effect. The defense, however, was not enough to sway the judge. I knew he had already made up his mind based on the facts I had presented last time. He was a fair man, and I wasn't going to let this second trial be any different. Still, I had to remain vigilant. The turning point, Clara's past revealed. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, but I held my head high. I spoke with clarity and strength, detailing the love I had for Max and how every decision I made had been for his well-being. But then, I introduced a new element, something Clara wasn't prepared for. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady, while I stand before you as a mother who has made mistakes, I am here today because I have worked to fix those mistakes. I am not the person I was before, and I am not the person Clara is trying to make me out to be. But what I would like to present now is something that may change the way you see the person who is trying to take Max away from me. The room fell silent. Clara's lawyer exchanged nervous glances with his client, unsure of what I was about to do. I have obtained records and testimonies from people who know Clara's past, her behavior when she wasn't the public figure she is now. This is the woman who wants to take my child away from me. This is the woman who claims to be the better mother. I motioned for my lawyer to present the evidence. A series of photos and statements from acquaintances, colleagues, and former friends of Clara's were shown. They depicted her as manipulative, cruel, and emotionally unstable in ways that bordered on abusive. The testimony revealed her unhealthy relationship with her previous partners, her inability to form genuine connections with anyone, and her deep need for control over people, especially children. One statement from a former nanny was especially damning. The nanny had witnessed Clara belittling her children's emotional needs and openly neglecting them when it was convenient for her. The testimony painted a disturbing picture of someone who was not fit to care for a child, especially one as sensitive as Max. Clara's face flushed with anger, and I saw her hands clench under the table. She had not expected this. Max's voice, the heart of the case. But the most powerful moment came when Max took the stand. I had hesitated, unsure if bringing him into the courtroom would be too much. But Max had insisted, wanting to be part of this fight for himself. He was older now, and I could see the maturity in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stood before the judge, nervously clutching the sides of the podium, but when he spoke, it was clear he had made his decision. I don't want to go with Clara, Max said, his voice trembling but firm. She's not nice to me. She makes me feel like I'm not important. Mom always makes sure I'm okay. She listens to me. I know she loves me. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I held myself together. Max's words were the most powerful evidence I could have ever asked for. His testimony struck at the very heart of what mattered, the emotional bond between a mother and her child, and the deep connection they shared. Clara's collapse. As the day wore on, Clara's attempts to discredit me grew more desperate. Her lawyer tried to present new evidence, but each time it was swiftly countered. The judge seemed increasingly frustrated with her tactics. By the end of the day, it was clear that Clara's case had crumbled. Her lawyer tried one final attempt, suggesting that Max would be better off with Clara because she could provide more stability and financial support. But the judge was having none of it. "Ms. Clara, I have heard enough," the judge said sternly. "This case has been drawn out far too long. The truth is clear, your past actions and your emotional instability have disqualified you from being the custodial parent. Ms. Sophia has demonstrated her capacity for growth and her love for her son. The court finds that Max is better off with his mother." The final decision, victory. The room was silent for a long moment as the judge's words sank in. And then, slowly, it hit me. I had won. The judge's final ruling echoed in my mind as I walked out of the courtroom, my heart soaring with relief. I could barely contain my emotions as I saw Max standing there, his eyes wide with hope. "Mom, does this mean I get to stay with you?" Max asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, my heart swelling. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be okay." As we walked out of the courthouse together, the weight of the battle finally lifted from my shoulders. Clara's influence had waned, and now Max and I could begin to rebuild our lives without fear of her constant interference. But I knew this victory wasn't the end of the road, it was only the beginning of a new chapter for us. A chapter where Max and I could finally live freely, without the shadows of the past hanging over us. The storm was over. And the calm that followed was sweeter than anything I had ever known. Chapter 17, The New Beginning. The weeks after the court ruling were a whirlwind of emotions, but the heavy burden that had once clouded my every decision slowly began to lift. I had won, Max was staying with me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe freely. The months I spent in prison, the betrayal I endured, and the constant battle for my son had taken their toll, but now, in the quiet moments, I could feel a sense of peace settling over me. The aftermath, Clara's last moves. Even though I had won, I knew Clara wasn't one to accept defeat gracefully. She had already started making her next move, calling in favors and spreading rumors, trying to tarnish my name once again. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready for whatever she had planned. I had been through too much, and the person I had become was no longer someone who could be pushed around. Max noticed the shift in me too. He had always been perceptive, even as a child. He knew when I was sad, when I was anxious, and when I was pretending to be stronger than I felt. But now, he saw something different. He saw a mother who was unyielding, someone who wasn't just surviving, but truly living again. We spent the next few days together, bonding in ways we hadn't been able to for years. We went on walks in the park, cooked meals together, and stayed up late watching movies, simple things that were always overshadowed by the chaos before. But now, they felt like the most important moments of our lives. Max's struggle, rebuilding trust. Despite the victory, Max's struggle wasn't over. He had been through so much at such a young age, and the scars weren't just physical, they were emotional. Max had trouble trusting people, especially women, and it was clear that Clara's betrayal had left deep marks on his heart. One night, after we had finished dinner, Max approached me hesitantly, his small hands wringing together. "Mom," he began, his voice quiet, "do you think Clara really hated me?" His question struck me like a blow to the chest. I knelt down beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face, my heart aching for the little boy who had been caught in a war that wasn't his to fight. "No, sweetheart," I said softly, "she didn't hate you. But sometimes people make terrible choices, and those choices can hurt others. What's important now is that we've won, and we're together. You don't need to worry about her anymore." Max looked up at me, his eyes filled with doubt, but also a flicker of hope. I could see that he was trying to believe me, to trust in the safety that I was promising him. "We'll take it one step at a time," I added. "You'll see, we're going to heal together." The new threat, Clara's last stand. Clara wasn't one to back down quietly, and I knew she wouldn't give up without a final attempt to regain control. Rumors started circulating again, false accusations about my character and parenting abilities. Her new tactic was to go after my reputation, trying to discredit me publicly. She had friends in high places, and she knew how to use them. But this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had support, my lawyer, my family, and even some of the people from my past who had seen the truth of Clara's behavior. The lies she was spreading wouldn't stand. I gathered every piece of evidence I had to prove my innocence and the falsehoods of her accusations. I wasn't going to let her use my past against me anymore. Facing Clara, the final confrontation. One evening, Clara showed up at my doorstep. She was alone, which surprised me. I had expected her to come with her lawyer or some kind of backup. But as I opened the door, there she stood, dressed in a sharp suit, her face pale but determined. "Is Max here?" Clara asked, her voice cold but trembling with underlying emotion. "He's upstairs, but I don't think you're here for him," I replied, my tone calm, betraying none of the fury I felt. "What do you want, Clara?" She hesitated before speaking again, her eyes flickering with something darker. "I'll never stop fighting for him. You may have won this round, but I'll make sure you lose in the end. You don't deserve to be his mother." Her words hit harder than I had anticipated. But instead of reacting with anger, I simply closed the door slightly, cutting off her access to my life. "You're wasting your time," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done letting you manipulate me. This is over." The healing, a mother's love. Max was waiting for me when I returned upstairs. His eyes were wide with curiosity, but he didn't ask about the conversation with Clara. He knew what it meant. He had seen the shift in my demeanor. He could tell that Clara's power over us was slipping away. We sat together, just the two of us, in the quiet of our home. I held Max close, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't have to pretend that everything was fine. We were healing, one moment at a time. I could see it in his eyes, the fear was gone, replaced by a cautious optimism. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, kissing the top of his head. Max looked up at me, his lips curling into a small smile. "I believe you, Mom." And with those words, I knew we had turned a corner. The long battle was behind us. The future was ours to reclaim. Chapter 18, The Beginning of the End. The weeks after Clara's visit were nothing short of tense, but the atmosphere in our home had shifted. Max was slowly healing, and the constant threat of Clara's manipulations seemed to lose its power. However, I knew deep down that this wasn't the end. Clara was not one to back down quietly, and as time went on, I realized that the final confrontation with her would be inevitable. Max and I continued to rebuild, enjoying simple pleasures. We spent evenings together, talking about school, about life, and about everything that had been lost in the years of chaos. Yet, in the back of my mind, I knew this peace might be fleeting. I prepared for the worst, hoping for the best, but I wasn't blind to the fact that Clara had a tendency to always come back stronger when cornered. Clara's last move. The day it came, when I knew this battle would finally end, was a shock, but in hindsight, I should have seen it coming. Clara, never one to accept defeat gracefully, had used her final weapon against me. She'd found a way to manipulate the situation, one last time, to her advantage. A new court hearing was scheduled, and this time, it wasn't about custody or parental rights. It was about my reputation once again. I was summoned to court, and my heart raced as I walked into the familiar room. Max wasn't with me this time. I had told him that this was my battle alone. He was no longer a child caught in the middle. He had come so far, and I didn't want him to see the ugliness of the world once again. He trusted me, and I wouldn't let him down. The final showdown. The courtroom felt colder than usual as Clara stood across from me, her eyes as sharp as ever. Her lawyer had prepared an argument, claiming that I wasn't fit to be Max's mother, that I couldn't protect him from the dangers of the world, and that my actions in the past proved that I wasn't capable of providing him with the stability he needed. I sat there, my heart pounding, but my resolve stronger than ever. I knew this was it, the final act of this twisted drama. It was time to end it once and for all. The judge listened carefully to both sides, weighing the evidence. Clara's accusations fell flat when confronted with the truth. My lawyer had gathered everything, every lie, every manipulation, and every false claim she had made. Clara's position was crumbling, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew this was the end. I stood up to address the court, my voice steady but firm. "I've been through more than most people can understand," I began. "I've fought for my son, not because I had to, but because I loved him. I loved him when he was a tiny baby in my arms, and I love him now, despite all that has happened. I have never, and will never, let anyone take him away from me." I paused, looking around the room. Clara's face was pale, and I could see the cracks in her defense. "You can continue to spread lies about me, you can try to destroy my name, but one thing remains, I am Max's mother, and no one can change that." The judge called for a brief recess, and as the room emptied, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Clara's defeat was imminent, but I couldn't allow myself to feel completely victorious just yet. I had to stay focused, for Max's sake. The court's decision. When the hearing resumed, the judge announced his decision. I was granted full custody of Max, and Clara's attempts to discredit me were dismissed. The judge acknowledged the emotional toll that Clara's behavior had taken on my son and recognized that my actions, despite the mistakes I had made in the past, showed a genuine commitment to his well-being. Clara, standing across the room, looked as though the life had been drained from her. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her, but the bitterness quickly followed. She had caused so much harm, and she wasn't going to get away with it anymore. The court dismissed the case, and I walked out with a newfound sense of freedom. I could finally breathe, truly free from the suffocating grip of her manipulation. The aftermath, starting over. The days that followed were calm but full of reflection. Max and I found ourselves in a new chapter, one where our relationship could finally flourish without the interference of others. We still had much healing to do, but now, we could do it together, without fear of losing each other. Max's trust in me was stronger than ever. I could see it in the way he smiled, the way he'd curl up beside me on the couch at night. We were no longer bound by the ghosts of our past. I realized that while Clara's presence would always linger in our memories, it didn't have the power to control us anymore. Our future was ours to shape. And this time, there was no one standing in our way. The final scene, a new dawn. A few months passed. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, but they were no longer fresh wounds. The weight of the battle, the tension, and the loss had all been replaced by a quiet hope. Max was thriving in school, and I had finally found a sense of peace that I hadn't thought was possible. One evening, as we sat together, watching the sunset from our living room window, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Max leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder, and I could hear his soft breath as he drifted into sleep. The world outside was changing, but in that moment, everything felt right. Max was safe, and I was no longer running from my past. I had finally freed myself from the chains that had held me down for so long. We were starting over. And this time, it would be different. The end.